Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the online launching of mainstreaming of children's rights and environmental law, or mainstreaming of children's rights and environmental law. We have a few reminders before we formally start our event this morning. If you are in a public place, please make sure to observe minimum health protocols such as social distancing and wearing of face masks. Please refrain from removing your mask unless necessary. We will be sending the link to the attendance from here in our Zoom meetings chat box. For our online attendees, please make sure to fill out the Google form for the attendance. We will be sending a certificate of attendance after the event, so please do not forget to fill out the attendance. Thank you very much, and we will be starting the program in the next minute. All right, thank you everyone. And again, welcome to the online launching of mainstreaming of children's rights in environmental law. We will now formally start the event. Please remain in proper decorum during the singing of the Philippine national anthem and the invocation.
Mga kababayan, ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas.
Kayang magiliw, helas ng silanganan, alam ng puso, sa titik mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, kuya ka ng magiting, sa mandulupin, di ka pasisingil, sa nagagang tutok sa simoy at sa langit ng pagaw, ay hinatang tulang awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang isang ng matawad mo'y tagumpay na naghihiling, ang bituin at araw niya kailan pang ay di magdidinig. Lumalang araw ng warhabing pagsinta, buhay langit sa piling mo. Ang inigaya ng pagkay mga api, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Magandang umaga po sa ating lahat. We humbly welcome you to the online launching of Human Rights Toolkit, Mainstreaming Children's Rights in Environmental Law. Ako po si Idalagaringan, consultant and friend of Fun Talk 6, and I will be your host for this wonderful event. This event and document will not be possible without the help and guidance of the Swedish Society for Nature Conservation, or SNNC, and the Dr. Yangas Colleges Incorporated. Bantox is greatly, extremely grateful for your support and guidance. The theme for today's event is New Normal na walang iwanan, karapatan ng bawat bata atin nang tutukan sa mga ginagawang batas pangkalikasan. So before we start, paalala lang po, you can access the attendance sheet sa ating chat box. And then at the end of the program, if you sign dun sa ating attendance sheet, you'll receive a certificate. Going back to our program, the document Mainstreaming Children's Rights in Environmental Law outline specific tools and guidelines in developing policies and programs that are responsive to children's needs in the context of environmental law. These documents provide a short overview of chemical issues that children are facing, as well as the tools provided by the document Mainstreaming Children's Rights in Environmental Law. Participants who are asked to participate in the roundtable are requested to review the tools and evaluate how they can help the agency, non-government organization group in their work. With that said, may we call on the Executive Director of Bantalk 6, Sir Reynaldo San Juan Jr., for his welcome remarks.
Good morning to everyone. I can access my video. Okay. Can you hear me, Saidel?
Yes, sir. Loud and clear.
Okay. Sorry, I can access my video, but I'm going to share my speech. Good morning, everyone. I would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone who is here today. We humbly welcome everyone to the online launching of our Human Rights Toolkit, Mainstreaming Children's Rights in Environmental Law. Bantalk 6 is a non-government, non-profit environmental organization established in 2006. And Bantalk 6 strongly supports the protection of the environment and advocates for an environmentally sustainable future through the promotion of sound chemicals and waste management practices. We are committed to the advancement of environmental justice to protect vulnerable populations, especially women and children. Bantalk 6 has worked for years with communities, academic institutions, and government units to address mercury and mercury pollution. Our pioneering work focused mostly on the sound management of mercury through successful policy and community engagements. We have also worked to promote awareness about harmful chemicals and the sound management of chemicals at all levels through policy engagement with government agencies and policymakers, projects on the ground with communities, and the Toxics-Free School program with students and teachers. The document Mainstreaming Children's Rights in Environmental Law outlines specific tools and guidelines in developing policies and programs that are responsive to children's needs in the context of environmental law. The document is designed to, among others, provide, number one, provide tools for decision makers and government agencies that they can use as reference to ensure that children's rights are reflected in the environmental laws they formulate. Number 2, provide non-government organizations and related groups tools that they can use to review and assess existing policies and or policy recommendations. And number 3, this document can provide people in general the necessary tools they need to assess whether policies and programs are responsive to the needs of children, in particular in the context of environmental law. We would like to express our gratitude to the authors of this book, the founder and former executive director of Bantoc 6, Attorney Richard Gutierrez. Mylene Makabuhay, our former policy and research specialist and still our consultant. To the consulting advisors, Basco Tungkak, the former special rapporteur on the implications for human rights of the environmentally sound management and disposal of hazardous substances and waste. Jashap Shamir, Jam Lorenzo, and Mary Joy Maraat. Our thanks for the Swedish Society for Nature Conservation and Dr. Yangas Colleges Incorporated for their support and guidance for this event. We would also like to express our appreciation to our speakers, our reactors and guests for taking part in today's launching. We are grateful to everyone who is here with us today. Let us continue our mandate to protect the youth and children from all forms of exploitation. Good morning and welcome to this launching.
Wow, thank you, Sir Ray, for that very insightful welcome speech. Before we proceed to the next speaker, maybe remind everyone to answer the attendance form. The link to the Google form is available in the chat box. Maraming salamat po. All right, for our keynote speaker, we have Attorney Richard Gutierrez. He is the current Program Management Officer of the Secretariat Team of Minamata Convention. Attorney Gutierrez is also the founder and the former Executive Director of Bantoc 6. Ladies and gentlemen, Sir, Attorney Richard Gutierrez.
Hello, magandang umaga, Edel. I hope everyone's doing well. Can you, naririnig niyo ba ako ng maayos? Sorry.
Yes, sir. Malinaw po.
All right, excellent. Ayan, I think my video is on. Hello, everyone. And first of all, I wanted to thank Bantoc 6 and Kari for inviting me to provide an opening remark for this event. So I'm very grateful and I feel honored and to be asked to do this. So thank you. I also would like to extend my thanks before I begin my remarks. I also wanted to thank the people who worked on this with me, particularly Mylene. You know, she was she put a lot of effort in this. This has been a years-long work. The teams at Bantoc 6, si Jam, si Kare, everyone who helped not just on the substance but also on the administratively in putting this work together, and especially Bashkut and Johanna. They helped, looked at the draft, improved on it, provide critical inputs as to and give it more concrete direction. Having said that, I just wanted to, when I listen back, when I listen to the objectives of the manual, it seems so lofty. Analyzing policy and making sure that environmental law responds to children's rights. Ang pinagmulan po nung proyektong ito actually ay mas simple po ang pinagmulan ito. The project came about because of a discussion actually. about where this human rights, or you can inversely look at it as well, where does environmental advocacy fall within human rights? And in my decades-long work on environmental justice, yung dalawang kampong po ito ang parating, at least back then, back in the early 2000s, there was a constant sort of distinction. Mahirap pag-usapan ng human rights sa kampo ng environmental advocacy and vice versa, because certain things did not match. For instance, the issue of precautionary principle versus the issue of redress in a violation of human rights. So natatandaan ko, nagkaroon kami ng pagpupulong nito with some human rights advocates and environmental advocates. Although we knew that we were talking about the same thing, we had a very difficult time arriving at the same concepts. Again, the classic example to my mind is the precautionary principle versus redress. The precautionary principle is simply you're faced with an uncertainty, you take action to prevent harm, essentially. While redress is, when human rights violations occur, there should be a right to some form of redress to address those violations. So, although the point is the same to some extent, the means, or at least the concepts, are a bit different. And dyan po nagmula itong proyektong ito. So from that discussion, nagsagawa po ang Bantalk 6 ng isang handbook on human rights and the environment to help understand and piece together these concepts. At from that work came about the manual you're looking at. Nagagalak din po ako dahil this is a sort of passion project that started sa Bantalk 6 when I was still with Bantalk 6. At ngayong wala na po ako sa Bantalk 6, I am very happy to see that the team is moving forward and bringing it new life. So, ang gusto ko lang pong iparating din is that in spite of the broad goals that the mainstreaming tools tries to do, at its core, at least for me, what I wanted to do as well was to have a discussion on the issue. Because until you have a way to discuss and a platform to discuss these issues, ideas, and also an acknowledgement of rights and an opportunity to learn, it doesn't happen. So I hope that with today's workshop, that at the minimum, a heartfelt and deep discussion can arise that can further help and solidify the tools and hopefully validate the tools in its application to environmental law. Then the other thing that I wanted to impart to those of you who are present today in this workshop is that I also hope that with the work that you're doing today, it does not remain within the Philippines. I'm looking forward to the outcome of the work, so that perhaps this is something that we can bring all the way outside of the Philippines and in application in multilateral environmental agreements such as the Minamata Convention on Mercury, where I'm working in right now. So with that, pinapahatid ko ulit ang aking pasasalamat sa Bantalk 6, sa pamunuan ng Bantalk 6, to Kare and to everyone. So, and also to you, the participants who are listening in, and the panelists who are here and the speakers. Maraming salamat po. I think this is from a biased source, I think this is a worthwhile effort, not just because it's from Bantalk 6, but really it's the promotion of children's rights, an understanding of it must go beyond dialogue. And this is a concrete way to put words into action by understanding what laws are and the implications to children's life. Environmental laws are and their implications to children's rights and vice versa. At gaya na sinabi ni Kare, I hope that the outcome of the workshop will be also helpful in protecting children, youths, vulnerable populations beyond the main intended audience. So with that, maraming salamat po, and I wish you all a fruitful discussion for today. Back to you, Edel.
Thank you, Richard, for giving us an overview on how this project was conceived. Indeed, it is when we talk and think and challenge ourselves that wonderful ideas for our advocacy will come out. It's a concrete example of conversation, from conversation to concrete action. Maraming salamat ulit, Richard. And I know it's early morning in Canada, I think. We are grateful for your support and guidance. Okay, next in line, we have a message from Reverend Father Conigundo Garganta. He is an executive father of the Catholic Bishop Conference of the Philippines. Good morning, Father.
Magandang umaga sa inyong lahat. Good morning. This is Father Coligundo Barbosa Garganta of the Catholic Bishops Conference of the Philippines, Episcopal Commission on Youth. I would like to offer our congratulations and thanks to Bantok 6 for the launch of the mainstreaming children's rights in environmental law. This is an important step or move to show our care and our concern for our children, especially they who are the weakest member of the society. And with this step and with this initiative of Bantok 6, we are given additional assurance that our children will not be left unaided. They will be supported, they will be assisted. So we congratulate you and we offer you our thanks. May this initiative prosper so that children will be assured of being provided with the assurance that their rights will be respected.
All right, thank you, Father Conigundo Garganta of CBCP. All right, and hindi pa tayo nagsisimula para i-present yung ating document, pero marami na tayo kaagad nakikitang insights, tamang-tama para sa team natin for today, new normal na walang iwanan, karapatan ng bawat bata atin ng tutukan sa mga ginagawang bakas pangkalikasan. Okay, moving forward, we have Ashaf Shamir Lorenzo, or we call him Jam. He is the current policy and research associate of Bantok 6 and is also a contributor to the Children's Rights Toolkit. He will give us a brief overview of the document. Over to you, Jam.
Thank you, Sir Edel. Naririnig ba ako? Okay. So I will be sharing my presentation. So good morning, everyone. Again, I am Jam Lorenzo from the Policy Development and Research Unit for Bantok 6. I will be discussing a few background information that we need before we can discuss the tools na outlined sa mainstreaming children's rights and environmental law. So Bantok 6, again, we are an independent, non-government, non-profit environmental organization that works for the advancement of environmental justice, health, and sustainable development in the area of chemicals and wastes with a special focus on women, children, and other marginalized sectors. So a brief overview of the document. Mainstreaming Children's Rights in Environmental Law is a technical document that, number one, provides an overview of the key chemical issues that are impacting children, discusses how policies are impacting children and shaping the health risks that they face, and we also provide two tools that are designed to assist stakeholders in the development of policies, regulations, and programs in accordance with the overall goal of protecting and upholding children's rights in environmental law. The tool also allows stakeholders to assess existing policies and guidelines and review their responsiveness to the needs of children. And finally, it allows the general public to assess how their rights are being protected in environmental law. So to undertake such a huge endeavor, nagbuo kami ng team of experts. So the document is developed by 6 people, with the main author being Miss Mylene Makabuhay, who is present right now, and Sir Richard Gutierrez, who presented earlier. He was the former executive director of Bantoxics, and he is currently working at the Minamata Convention in Geneva. We also had consulting advisors, Mr. Basco Tungkak, who is the founder and chief executive officer of Common Rights, which is based in Seattle. Ms. Mary Joy Maraat, who during the development of the document was project officer for the CHR. So she will be presenting the tools later. We also have contributors such as Ms. Johanna Guzman, an international human rights lawyer who at the time of the development of the report was a legal advisor for the Georgetown University Law Center. And of course, I am Jam Lorenzo from the Policy and Research Unit of Bantoxics. We also conducted a workshop in December 2019, which was almost 2 years ago, where we presented the tools initially. So the event was participated in by a number of organizations such as the CHR, the Ateneo Human Rights Center, the Children's Legal Rights and Development Center, Children International, and a lot of other organizations. So what we did was we presented the tools to them and we gathered comments and suggestions which are now incorporated in the full document. So kung mapapansin nyo ay this was 2 years ago. Medyo na-delay po kasi yung activities natin due to the pandemic. But finally, we are launching the document. So what are the main objectives of the document? So the document provides a checklist of the basic principles and elements that need to be considered in policy implementation, which addresses issues such as the extent to which implementing officials and target groups act consistently with the objectives and procedures outlined in the policy decisions, the extent to which policy objectives are attained, the principal factors affecting policy outcomes and impacts, and the policy's reformulation, if any. So through these two rights-based tools na ipepresent ni Mary Joy later, the authors hope that governments and non-government organizations in the region are provided with an additional arsenal in advocating for the sound management of chemicals and wastes. So the tools are not designed to be the be-all, end-all tools na gagamitin natin in developing environmental law, but they are designed to give an extra arsenal, kumbaga, for our decision makers that they can use in ensuring that the environmental laws we formulate are consistent with the needs of children. So why do we need to discuss the importance of children's rights and chemicals? So first and foremost, environmental factors are a root cause of significant burden of death, disease, and disability globally, particularly in developing countries. In fact, yung mga manifestations of chemicals pollution such as poor water quality, air pollution, chemical exposures, climate change, and the degradation of the urban environment contribute to as much as 25% of deaths and diseases globally. And among these ay yung children ang most vulnerable, accounting for as much as 1.7 million children under the age of 5 ang nai-impact ng pollution each year. So environmental hazards coupled with social stress and malnutrition in poverty-stricken settings pose an almost insurmountable barrier to a child's normal development and deprive them of their rights to physical integrity, the highest attainable standards of health and survival. So here are some facts na cited in the document. So diseases such as cancer, respiratory illnesses, and intellectual disabilities are all linked with chemical exposure. So early exposures to cancer-causing agents preconceptionally during intrauterine life or in early childhood, and it is projected na cancer-related deaths will continuously rise to over 16 million in 2025. And respiratory illnesses such as na brought forth by tobacco smoke, chemical irritants, and air pollutants are significant risk factors. And right now, it is estimated that between 100 to 150 million people are affected by respiratory illnesses such as these. And another example ay intellectual disabilities. According to the World Health Organization, childhood-led exposure is linked to 600,000 annual cases of intellectual disabilities. There was a study that we reviewed cited in the document where it showed na children living near battery plants are 13 times higher than average yung yung lead content sa kanilang blood. And furthermore, we should highlight that children are uniquely vulnerable. No, children are more vulnerable than their adult counterparts, basically. So children have greater exposures to toxic chemicals for their body weight than adults. So yung mga children kasi hindi lang sila basta-basta small adults, they also possess distinct characteristics that contribute to their greater susceptibility to environmental exposures. So yung exposure routes ng children include not only inhalation, ingestion, and dermal absorption, but also through transplacental transfer. And moreover, children's behavior and the way they interact with the environment also plays an important role in determining their exposure to toxic chemicals. So for example, children may play in areas that they are not aware may toxic chemical exposure, they play with things, they play with their hands. So children may not be as careful as adults. So their routes of exposure may be different. And furthermore, children's metabolic pathways are immature, and a child's ability to metabolize toxic chemicals is different from an adult. So basically, a child's body reacts differently to the same level of chemicals when compared to that of an adult. And children's early developmental processes are easily disrupted. No? Rapid, complex, and highly choreographed development takes place in prenatal life, the first years after birth, and continues more slowly throughout childhood into puberty. And one thing that we would want to highlight then is that children have more time than adults to develop chronic diseases. So maraming studies ang nagsasuggest na many diseases are triggered by toxic chemicals, no, such as cancer and neurodegenerative diseases na nag-evolve through multi-stage, multi-year processes. So children who are exposed early in their lifetime are more susceptible to diseases than adults, say, na na-expose lang only during the later years in their lives. So children then are more vulnerable sa ganitong context. So now that we have established that children are uniquely vulnerable to the impacts of toxic chemicals pollution, what can we do? So I'd like to direct our attention to Bantoxic's vision. If you've seen any of our publications or anything, ito yung lagi namin na-highlight that Bantoxic's, our vision is the only world worth passing on to our children is toxics-free. And by toxics-free, we mean that we acknowledge that chemicals are an important part of our lives, but we should manage them responsibly. Ano? So, dito na papasok yung document natin which outlines the duty of states and businesses. First and foremost, states must promote human rights and protect against abuses within their territories, including those committed by businesses, and take steps to prevent, investigate, punish, and redress human rights abuses. Businesses, on the other hand, should respect human rights by avoiding, causing, or contributing to adverse human rights impacts and by addressing such impacts when they occur. So, siguro ang key question for the audience right now is, bakit napasok yung business discussion natin, you know, when all we are talking about are policies and environmental law? Well, it is because toxic chemical pollution is linked to various industries, business processes, and human activities, no? Some examples include Bangladesh and the textile industry. So in Bangladesh, for example, factories surround the homes and schools of children in the city. So manufacturing processes emit hazardous pollutants. Hazardous waste such as used oil and empty containers for dyes and chemicals are also generated, and toxic liquid substances are often deposited into surrounding channels, agricultural fields, and rivers. If you check our background photo, we can see na yung river in Bangladesh is contaminated, no? Kulay purple siya. So a 2001 study conducted in the area found cases of physically deformed children living around these rivers. And furthermore, surface water and end-of-pipe samples from the textile industry operations had the effect of inducing genetic mutation and made it difficult for children to go to schools. So if you review the study na we are citing in the document, children have stated na nahihirapan sila mag-aral kasi laging masakit yung ulo nila sa schools which are near the textile industry operations. And lagi silang nasusuka and nauseous. So these are just minor impacts when we compare them to the genetic mutation that was seen to be induced by these activities. And another example of how business has impacted children and people in general ay yung Philippine Marcopper mining disaster, where mining operations ceased on March 24, 1996, when the plug that sealed the Tapian pit tunnel to the Buak River fractured. So this resulted to the release of an estimated 1.5 to 3 million cubic meters of sulfidic tailings na tumapon sa Makulapnit and Buak Rivers. So in one of Bantoxic's previous projects, we went to Marinduque, and up until now, I think that was around 2017 or 2018. And up until then, ay hindi pa rin usable to the public yung Makulapnit and Buak Rivers. So hindi pa rin nila nagagamit itong natural resources na ito. And back then, around 700 families or around 3,000 to 4,000 individuals from 5 villages were directly affected. And the surrounding terrestrial and aquatic environment were heavily contaminated. So many residents, including children, were found to have toxic blood levels of lead. And a lot of them actually have died due to lead intoxication. So balikan natin yung duties of the state. It is the state's duty and obligation to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights, no? Based on established international human rights law. Due to the inherent risk associated with toxic chemicals and pollution, such established duties and responsibilities can be used to induce effective regulation of manufacturing processes and product release, ensuring between balanced economic growth and the environmental social protections in their jurisdictions. Furthermore, states have a duty to protect human rights, including the right of the child. No? So it is the duty basically of the state to ensure that children are protected from the impacts of these business enterprises and toxic chemical exposure. Dahil sabi nga rito, states must protect children against exposure to toxic substances because this is an abuse of many of their human rights. So the document outlines various human rights that are affected by toxic chemical exposure, some of which include the right to life, right to a healthy environment, right to the highest attainable standard of health, right to food and water, right to adequate housing, right to be free from the worst forms of child labor, and right to information. So on the other hand, businesses also have responsibilities. Sabi rito, while states retain a duty to protect populations against corporate human rights abuses, businesses have a responsibility to respect the rights of the child. sabi rito ay Principle 17 of the UNGP proposed the concept of human rights due diligence as a mechanism for improved practice and a method for demonstrating respect for human rights. No, kasama rito sa responsibility na ito ay for businesses to focus on the rights of people that may be impacted by their activities. So, based on international human rights law, itong responsibility of businesses to focus on the rights of people that are impacted by their by their activities, this is independent. No, hiwalay ito sa obligations of the state. So both the state and the businesses have separate duties to uphold the rights of children. And so this ends my presentation, and the specific tools that have been developed by our main authors, Mylene and Sir Richard, as well as consulting advisors, will be presented by Miss Mary Joy Maraat, who contributed to the development of these tools. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jan, for giving for your presentation. I hope everyone is still with us. Just a few reminder that if you haven't signed up to our registration form, it's in our chat box. Thank you again, John, for your very insightful presentation. You provided us on how toxics impact children and the role of different stakeholders in ensuring their safety, especially the government. Now let's move forward on the discussions of the toolkit. And we are very happy this morning that we have Miss Mary Joy Maraat. She is the Bantoxis consultant on human rights. The Child Rights Toolkit was also developed with the help and expertise of Mary Joy. Good morning, Mary Joy.
Yes, good morning, Adele. I'll start my video and I hope I can share my screen.
All right.
There, I'll be sharing my screen. Good morning. Okay, so good morning, good day to our esteemed guests and participants, to our panel, and to the members of Bantoxics who worked hard to have this document launched today. Good morning. Our previous presenter already discussed the overview of this document and the cases in different countries that illustrates how the rights of the child were infringed when environmental laws are not consistent with protecting their rights. For this part of our program, I will be discussing the toolkit and the checklist we developed to assist decision makers and relevant stakeholders in the development of environmental laws that's consistent with the rights of the child. Please bear with me while we run through the toolkit and the checklist. The toolkit is not meant to be all comprehensive, but should be able to provide you guidelines that are designed for the users to raise essential questions that must be considered in the development of environmental law. So we are heading the call to mainstream child rights in our national and local policies. I believe a copy of the toolkit was sent to you alongside your invitation today. So looking back, when we created the toolkit, we used cases from different countries in the Asia-Pacific region as examples for the extent of violations and challenges. With such cases, there's a need to examine national policies and laws so we can identify whether they integrate the basic elements of human rights as enshrined in the international human rights law. The tool allows users to examine whether an existing or even a draft environmental policy contains provisions supporting the elements of child rights or if it does not fulfill any of the elements. The toolkit will help child rights advocacy groups and environmental non-government organizations or community-based organizations and other concerned stakeholders who'd like to do an analysis of whether children's rights are taken into consideration in the development of national or local environmental laws. When we examine policies as individuals, This allows for an independent review, which can be a good exercise in policy analysis and critical thinking. Meanwhile, examining policies as a group ensures sharing of knowledge and abilities to get a better understanding of our problem, especially when platforms for discussion of different perspectives are present. This is also useful when groups want to lobby amendments to certain environmental policies. So what's included in the toolkit? Child rights elements were divided into 5 general categories inside the toolkit. The first category would be the overarching principles, which are guiding principles that should be present throughout the law and serves as its foundation. The next category would be prevention of exposure, where criteria delve into the rights enumerated in our previous discussions and include questions that specifically look at the presence of provisions for each right. Next would be transparency and accountability. These questions focus on the duties and responsibilities of the states, business enterprises, and other stakeholders. Providing a separate category for this ensures that no pertinent duty or obligation by any actors are missed. Next category would be access to remedy, which includes all aspects of the right to access remedy, including components ranging from prevention, rehabilitation, remediation, among others. Next would be punishment and redress. Although part of the right to access to remedy, this category enumerates the criminal penalties and sanctions that must be incorporated into policies to discourage perpetrators from contributing to childhood exposure and violating children's rights. So the first step to using this tool is for the users to get a published copy of the existing draft policy or its IRR, and then we'll have to run through that policy, read through it, and be acquainted through it with the provisions enshrined in that law. With the help of this tool, there are 5 categorizations for each child rights elements. This provides general list of basic principles that should be considered throughout the process of using this tool. Under each element, there's a set of guide questions that the users need to answer as they examine the policies they are reviewing. These questions serve as guidelines that users should use to assess the effectiveness of the policy and recommendations that are developed throughout the usage of this tool. In the following slides, I'll be going over the elements I mentioned and just quickly take a look at the guide questions. So under the first category, under the basic principles, we have 5. Actually, we have 9. So the first 5 is, it is important to assess if the environmental policy we are examining enshrines the following basic principles. For 1.1, questions are posed to see whether the law considers all persons to be treated equally before the law and without discrimination. For 1.2, the best interest of the child should be at least primary consideration in drafting environmental laws. For number 3, protection groups at elevated risk. Human rights institutions already have broad responsibilities, but there's a need to give priority to groups whose rights have been violated and those whose rights are really at risk, and this includes children. In terms of precautionary principle, states, through its laws, should have an obligation to take steps to reduce or eliminate threats to the protection of children's rights, even if the degree of the threat is still unknown or uncertain. For 1.5, we all know that socioeconomic rights protect the important elements of human freedom and well-being, and therefore require recognition and reinforcement. So this will ensure the freedom of the child to live their lives to its fullest. For 1.6, the life cycle approach, well, the impacts of all the life cycle stages in business processes when it comes to materials, manufacturing, the use by the customer, even the disposal of handling the disposal and the end use, all of these need to be considered comprehensively in environmental law since this impacts child rights at various stages. is important to check whether our environmental policies are comprehensive enough to cover this. For the rest, it is also important to check if our national local policies adhere to international human rights laws, comprehensively discuss the role of the states, and the role of non-state actors. So for the first category, let's just quickly look at the guide questions since you already have it with you. Here's a snap of the guide questions in the toolkit for the first category. So if you have a copy, you can run through this. I don't really need to mention all of the questions. Just a quick snap of the questions for you. There. So for the second category, that's the prevention and exposure. So when children are exposed to environmental risks, pollutions, and toxics, their basic human rights, as listed here in this section, are at risk of being infringed. The question in the toolkit reinforces the importance of the right to be heard, as this right applies equally to children's participation in social and political matters. So in this case, the developing of environmental laws and policies. For 2.2, the child's right to appropriate information is also examined through our questions. So it's part of the child's fundamental human right of participation and access to justice, which should be considered in crafting our environmental policies. For 2.3, the right of the child to survival and development is also closely linked to the rights of the child to enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health, to health services, and to an adequate standard of living. So all of these rights should be considered when we are drafting environmental policies. So once again, like for 2.4, children's rights recognize fundamental guarantees to all human beings: the right to life, the non-discrimination principle, the right to dignity through the protection of physical and mental integrity, and the right to the attainable standard of health, as I mentioned before, should be considered when we are drafting our environmental laws and policies. So for 2.6, I'll just run it down: right to a healthy environment, environmental justice, right to an adequate standard of health, right to non-discrimination, and right to be free from the worst forms of child labor. So all of these should be considered in drafting our environmental laws and policies, national or even the local level, in our ordinances and national laws. So let's look at the snap of the questions involved in the second category. So we have several questions under each element. There, so it might be small in the screen, but you have a copy with you, so I hope you run through it. There. So for the third category, we divided it into two elements under the responsibilities of state actors in ensuring transparency and accountability, and then another category under the non-state actors. So for the state actors, so the questions posed under this would help the users look into the policy, check whether an appropriate institutional framework is integrated, provision as to where the funds are sourced during the implementation, or if the law has provisions for capacity building of the state actors to fulfill its role. The questions would also help in assessing how the law requires the duty bearers to exercise due diligence in identifying or eradicating the involvement of the public sector in the destruction of the environment, and also in preventing, causing, or contributing to transboundary environmental harm that affect the rights of children even abroad or outside of your own country. For this part of the category, questions are posed for elements under the responsibilities of non-state actors in ensuring transparency and accountability. So as mentioned by our previous speaker, the business enterprises, corporations are also covered here. So questions to seek how the law ensures that the cost of environmental control will be required on the polluter. So that's 3.6. How the law eases the burden of proof on children when it comes to environmental suits against actors committing the harm. Questions on how the law advises businesses to exercise child rights due diligence and generate and disclose information related to environmental risk factors and communicating them about the measures that they need to take to mitigate potential harm to children are there in the toolkit in this category. There are also questions in this toolkit looking at how the law requires companies to ensure that the rights of children are respected along the entire supply chain as well, from raw material acquisition through manufacturing until the retail, and also questions on how the law requires non-state actors to rehabilitate and guarantee that there's non-occurrence if any violations are committed are also there. So let's take a look at the questions for the third category. The questions covering the elements under the third category are here. So let's run through it. And I hope in your copy, you're also running through your e-copies of the toolkit. So for the fourth category, for this portion of the toolkit, the questions are posed to examine whether the law takes into account how children and even future victims affected by pollution or toxics are provided access to appropriate remedial procedures, or how the law ensures that the children's access to information about measures when their rights are violated are there in the laws and policies. So the questions also assess if the law or policy places the burden of proof, like I said before, on children or their caregivers, or how it is able to protect the child victims from the burdens of accessing legal defense and health assistance. So here are the questions for this category. Now for the last category in the toolkit, the questions revolve around how the law recognizes special procedures of cases involving child rights violations, or how it establishes the damages, especially in relation to its effects on the health and well-being of children. Questions are also posed to establish if the state will have the capacity to investigate and prosecute actors that violate child rights and environmental health. Questions on sanctions and compensations are also present in this portion of the toolkit. So here are the questions I mentioned. All right. So now that we've gone through all of the categories, we need to know how to use the toolkit. So like I said, you need to get a published copy of the policy and its IRR, or a published copy of the draft. Then we need to identify the provisions specifically integrating the concerned child right. So for example, we have here the policy in review. Let's say we have the National Policy on Toxic and Hazardous Waste Control and Management. So we have here the guide question in the toolkit. So we need to identify the provisions specifically integrating the concerned child right. So if it is contained in the existing policy or the draft policy you are reviewing, for example, you will have to put here, you need to identify that provision that specifically integrates the concerned child right element. If the existing policy or the draft that you are reviewing do not contain provisions integrating the element in question, or if such provision are not clear from the face of the regulation, you need to discuss the types of provisions expected to be included in the draft or in the policy, which integrates your concerned child rights. So for example, right to a healthy environment, the guide question is, how does the law ensure safe air quality for children? And there's none. You need to put in the statement that the provision that you're expecting in the policy to integrate child rights elements. However, indicate not applicable if the element in question is not related to the existing policy and its associated rules or regulations or the draft policy. For example, we have the policy in review here, National Policy on Food Safety. The element in question is right to a healthy environment. If you deem it not applicable for the policy, then you put in not applicable for the existing draft or the policy you're reviewing. So you need to put a statement explaining that the element in question is not related to the policy being examined. All right, so that's for our first tool, the toolkit for checking policies, assessing policies, whether they are mainstreaming children's rights in the environmental laws. So while the tool we discussed earlier ensures that children's rights elements are integrated in the text of an existing or a draft environmental policy, the checklist now that we have ensures that these elements are also considered when carrying out the implementation of the policy. So we do not stop with the drafting or the revision of the policy, but we also look at the implementation of the policy. So this includes the development of programs, projects, activities in relation to that policy. As such, an overlap of elements between the checklist is intentional. So the checklist ensures that children's rights elements are also considered when carrying out implementation. So when we implement a policy, we have we identified 5 stages during the implementation. So what's included in this checklist? The checklist is divided based on the 5 stages in implementing policies, highlighting the best practices in integrating children's rights in policy implementation. So the first one would be policy outputs of implementing agencies. This stage involves the development of IRRs and action plans of government agencies or ministries mandated by the main policy document to carry out the provisions inside the law. This checklist that we will look at next in our slides identifies necessary documents, tools, and approaches that should be present in developing such IRRs and action plans. The next one would be compliance of target groups. So this stage involves identifying whether target groups like businesses are able to comply with the requirements set by the national policy or the law. In this regard, information management tools are enumerated to provide baseline data that will help in monitoring compliance and effectiveness or efficiency of policy implementation. For the next part, number 3, the third stage, actual impacts of policy outputs. This includes both positive and negative impacts of the policy, not only to the sector it regulates, but also for the sector it protects. This category thus includes elements needed to monitor childhood exposure, ranging from technical considerations up to socioeconomic conditions. For the stage 4, fourth stage, perceived impacts of policy outputs. So as the right to access effective remedy is considered a prerequisite for realization of other rights, this category ensures positive policy impacts. And lastly, major revisions of the policy. So this stage allows for the reformulation of the policy based on the evaluation or assessment of its observed impacts. So when we use the tool, the checklist, we can actually conduct FGDs, conduct studies, observations, however way you want it, conduct roundtables, discussions, just to get data on how the policy is being implemented. Let's look at the checklist. So we have here, for the first stage, the policy outputs of implementing agencies. So these are the good practices that we identified. We identified that this should be part in implementing the policy. So when in your discussion, in your research, if the policy is being implemented and has this number of action plans, this number 1 to 7 is included in their action plans and their IRR, then you can actually put that in the status. So I'll discuss how to put that in the checklist. So let's just run through this. And if you can't see in the screen, you can look at your copy. So that's for the second stage. This one is for the third stage, for the fourth stage, and the fifth stage. So how to use the checklist? So the review of documents describing the implementation of the process of the policy is crucial. We need to start with the planning process up to the monitoring or assessment activities conducted by the government agency or any third-party institution that's doing the assessment of the conduct of the policy. In addition, like I said earlier, the user can conduct key informant interviews of the implementors, as well as focus group discussions of representatives of the sector that they are regulating and the stakeholders that they are protecting. So we need to base the results on review of literature, KIIs, FGDs. So the users will fill out the second column in your checklist. Look at your blank checklist. So with all this data gathering involved, are related literature review, FGDs, KII, you will get your information, and then you need to fill out the second column on how the policy has been implemented. So for this one, let's say we are reviewing the policy, National Policy on Toxic and Hazardous Waste Control and Management. So we have here, indicate accomplished if the item concerned, so that's established mechanism structure for interagency coordination, is conducted in implementing the policy. So you need to put in the second column the description of how the item in question was carried out. For the next, indicate not accomplished if in the second column if the item of concern was not conducted or even considered in the course of the policy implementation. So for example, the element considered is collect child disaggregated socioeconomic and environmental baseline data. Now you can put not accomplished if this wasn't considered or this was not conducted in the implementation of the policy. If you can indicate pending if the government agency is still in its particular stage of implementation with the concerned element. So for example, in this policy, we have an element of A.7, explore the use of innovative strategies like economic incentive. So if you know in your data gathering that the concerned agency is doing it and will be implementing this one, you can put pending. So you put here pending of the pending if the concerned element is still in a certain stage of implementation, and you describe the stage. Why is it pending, or how, at what stage it is? So I guess that's it. But just a reminder, the users for the tool would require a deep understanding of the extent of the implementation of the policy being examined. For non-government organizations, you can use the checklist to seek accountability from government institutions in the implementation of certain policies. So I guess that's it for my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Joy, for giving us an overview on how we can utilize the toolkit. And I'm very excited to read and reread the toolkit. All right, so for our participants who just joined in, we are very happy to have you in the online launching of Mainstreaming of Children's Rights in Environmental Law Toolkit. The theme for today's event is New Normal na walang iwanan, karapatan ng bawat bata atin ang tutukan sa mga ginagawang batas pangkalikasan. A while ago, we had Jam Lorenzo, Bantoxic's Policy and Research Associate, who gave us a brief overview and context and the toolkit, and then Mary Joy Maarat, Bantoxic's Human Rights Consultant, presented the major parts of the toolkit. And now we are moving on to the reactions from our panelists. And we are very thankful for our two distinguished panelists this morning. They have read the documents and it's good to know their insights. Our two panelists include Sir Jerry Geronimo Sanchez. Sir Jerry is the current Chief of Hazardous Waste Management Section of the Environmental Quality Management Division under the Environmental Management Bureau of the ENR. We also have with us Dr. Lawrence Bello. He is currently a professor under the Chemical Engineering Department of the esteemed De La Salle University, Manila. Dr. Bello specializes in waste utilization, water and wastewater, environmental engineering, remediation, and phytoremediation. Okay, let's start with Sir Jerry for his reactions regarding the Child's Right Toolkit. Heading over to you, Sir Jerry.
Yes, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Bantoxic, for this privilege and opportunity to be one of your reactors. And I would request, Hannah, if Dr. Lawrence, my idol, Bello, should go first before me. But I requested this because simultaneously we had this PCBV an assessment workshop, and you know my background is very nice. So I'm here in Radisson Hotel. Hearing from Jam earlier, and with the presentation of Miss Joy Maraat. So the Environmental Management Bureau, or my unit, is not guilty of not considering all the elements. And I'm very proud to say that we have worked and we have recognized academe and civil society, just like Bantoxic, which are very instrumental to polishing our policy in relation to considering all aspects that the economic aspects, the environmental, the socio-economic aspects, so that will include the rights of the children. So, and we are also thankful to civil society and for Bantoxic focusing on heavy metals, like they are also the precursor of the issuance of our chemical control order, and even revision or amendment of the chemical control order for mercury and mercury compounds, that we have obligation to the Minamata Convention on Mercury, and that will consider and address also the adverse impact of mercury, not only to adults environment, but also to children, especially on the use of dental amalgams. And they have been part in the preparation of a national action plan. So from the checklist that Ms. Mary Joy presented, we're not really guilty because most of our policies are publicly consulted. And from the presentation of JAM, our experience with Mark Copper, and that is closest to my heart because I manage the rehabilitation. And that is where the policy evolved on establishing the Environmental Guarantee Fund. Because before, mining is the backbone of the Philippine economy, but we need to balance the socioeconomic impact of penalizing and closing down a company with the economic development. So there's rehabilitation, and those are documented, the lead poisoning and everything. So there's an ecology trust fund directed by the Office of the President. In the form of penalty, it's a penalty that the government allowed Mark Copper to continuously operate, provided they will set aside 30,000 pesos per day of operation for the rehabilitation and compensation of the affected parties. So, and that is also the precursor of incorporating the putting up of environmental guarantee funds in all major projects. So with regard to the policy, so as I've said, it's Bantoxic that also initiated and helped us improving our policy on mercury and compounds. And recently we just have completed our project with them with the Japan ASEAN Integration Fund project. uh, for updating our policy and in, how what are the strategies to be followed in the implementation of the National Action Plan, especially for mercury added products. And we know that mercury has deleterious effect on human health, especially for children exposed to it at very early age, uh, resulting to in cognitive motor skill because mercury lead will attack the nervous system. So we also have also issued the chemical control order for lead and lead compounds, and we know that the deeper the color of the chemical, the higher the metal content, and that will be confirmed by my idol, Dr. Lawrence, because he's in the practice that metals are color stabilizer. So even in lipstick or even well, we recognize that for mercury, for those well the human race is stability that we are brown based and we want to be fair and we want a whitening cream and little did we know that those whitening cream contains mercury. So you're getting fairer, but it's just well, I like the presentation and you will learn a lot from the reaction of Dr. Bello about Snow White. Why Snow White is Snow White. And I hope that Dr. Bello will repeat that. And I love it. And that is there's a big impact. So that is my reaction. No? And congratulations, Bantok, for this series of webinar and opening and protecting the children's rights. Because we know na, sabi nga ni Rizal, ang kabataan ng pag-asa ng bayan. Pero if we will not be telling them or will not be protecting their rights, so wala nang pag-asa yung bayan. And then if they will be exposed to a contaminated environment, like say the impact of lead, mental retardation, or poor memory, so wala na magandang pag-iisip yung mga kabataan. So thank you, Attorney. Well, I will say you are a lawyer, Attorney Maraat, that well, the checklist is very nice. And we are not really guilty because all concerned public consultation, we look into the socio-economic impact of any policy, and even well, it's inclusive. And that's the reason I'm saying we are not guilty because we listen to our colleagues from the civil society, and with this kind of forum, we are very thankful that this is an best form of awareness raising, and to instill and to raise the awareness of the people on what are the environmental laws and how to participate in improving the enforcement and implementation of it, especially in crafting the rules and regulations. So that will be all for my reaction, and thank you, Ban Toxic, and you will learn more from my idol, the doctor of from De La Salle University, Dr. Lawrence Bello. Good morning, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sir Jerry, for your insights and reaction, and for reminding us na ang kabataan ng pag-asa ng bayan, very timely for our team this morning. Sir Ray would like to say something. We missed him kanina kasi walang video yung kanyang welcome remarks. So maybe this is your chance na ipakita our chance to show you. Yes, Sir Ray, you want to say something?
Yeah. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to our dear friend, Sir Jerry. Sir Jerry, maraming salamat for taking your precious time with us, sharing your precious time with us. Alam po namin hindi kayo guilty at alam po namin na you're doing your best not only to protect the society and the environment with your EMB, your management in hazardous waste and chemicals. At alam po namin bahagi nun ang pagpapahalaga at pag-iingat sa mga kabataan. That's the reason why you're the first person na nasa isip namin na isama as a reactor dito po sa launching. And rest assured po na sa hard copy and soft copy po nitong libro ay bibigyan po namin kayo. Maraming salamat, Sir Jerry. Your Holiness. Salamat po.
Most welcome, Your Reverence, and it's my really privilege and at your service, Bantok. So we have more work to do. Congratulations for this initiative, and sustain this activity, work with us because we are friends and kayo ang kaakbay namin sa pagsaayos ng kapaligiran. At yun lang. At maraming salamat for the support also.
Makakasa po kayo. Salamat po.
All right, thank you, Sir Ray, and thanks again, Sir Jerry, for your reaction. Now we call on Dr. Lawrence for his reactions regarding the Child's Right Toolkit. Heading over to you, Dr. Lawrence.
So good morning. Am I audible? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
So again, thank you very much to my idol, actually, Sir Jerry Sanyes. And I would just like to tell everyone that what he was saying earlier was right. DNR and EMB have been, their office has been working truly. They're at the helm of it all on chemical wastes management. To share you some stories, I have actually worked with surgery for since 2018 and sitting in a lot of hearings and sessions in Congress and at the Senate. So truly, I think in the Philippines we have an extensive program naman, and then sabi nga niya, they are not guilty kasi sa totoo, the scrutiny, just to be able to put up and have a project approved, we have environmental impact assessments, and then just like what Sir Jerry has said, we already have in place the Environmental Guarantee Fund, and actually the lawmakers are trying to have a bill passed on mandatory environmental insurance coverage. So that's an added step or isa pang additional parang just to ensure that environmentally we are safe, and then we don't really harm what's left for us para sa sustainability. Although actually I just have some questions on the checklists. But I would like to commend everyone, like sila Attorney Joy, sila Sir Richard Gutierrez, sila Sir Jam for the checklist. It is a very comprehensive checklist. My questions are only that in using the checklists, would we have a scoring system for us to have sort of like a cut-off para we can say, ito acceptable to. And then in using that checklist, did we use sort of like differing weights? For example, is category B more important than category D? Or did we use 0.2, 0.2, 0.2 sa A, B, C, D, E? Something like that. And what do we do if, for example, like in the toolkit for children? Kasi what I'm scared of is it's actually really good because especially now the direction is towards gender and developmental studies, right? For women and children. I'm just scared na baka mamaya overly comprehensive din yung toolkit natin that mahirap siyang ma-address. So what will be your comments on those? Thank you very much.
Doc Lawrence, sige, sagutin ko na rin yung... and bago ko sagutin siguro yung ibang questions ninyo, gusto ko rin i-highlight yung comment ni Miss Mylene Makabuhay, who is actually the main author of the document. So nag-reply kasi siya kanina sa ating chat box, and sinasabi niya na it is also important to highlight that the use of the toolkit should be participatory. So this involves different stakeholders, and this can also be used as a capacity building exercise. So young people can be made aware of how chemicals pollution impact their human rights and can be capacitated to review, evaluate existing laws, and advocate for themselves. They can work with other stakeholders, child rights groups, government agencies to improve enhanced policies and to monitor the implementation of their provisions. So this is another aspect of the toolkit that we want to highlight. Thank you to Ms. Mylene. And another one is yung tanong natin regarding sa kung may hard scoring system siya. Actually, we had to modify the tool initially kasi para siyang yes or no question with a definite scoring system. Pero we had to modify it based na rin sa suggestions of our workshop participants and based na rin sa main objective of the tool, which is not to impose but to provide siguro another arsenal para lang siyang guiding document but not a definitive document that can tell you if this policy is responsive to the needs of children. So we actually modified the tool para less rigid and more open. Kasi nga para maging consistent siya with our objectives. So I hope that answers the question from Sir Lawrence.
Thank you, Cham. Ms. Joy, do you have a quick response too?
Yes, so for Doc Lawrence, actually, as Jam shared, the toolkit was modified because the goal is just to become, for the document to become a guiding tool. But really, it's a good opportunity also to note that we can also, maybe that's a potential activity or area that we can also develop in terms of the toolkit, since the checklist actually just looks at the existence and non-existence of the element we are discussing. But when we want to really quantify or qualify the performance of the implementing agency, really the scorecard is important so that we can really say if the implementation, even if it's existing, is it okay or is it implemented well or not? So thank you for your comment, Dr. Bello and Dr. Lawrence Bello. I thank you for that.
Thank you, Cham and Joy. Dr. Lawrence, do you have other insights on the toolkit?
I guess this is a work in progress naman because and there will be parang a lot of focus group discussions to address this. And then just like what Sir Jam has said, I think it would be really good na magkaroon tayo ng sort of a workshop or capacity building in using the toolkit. And I'm sure once it's there, everyone can pitch in and we can develop a more rounded and parang more comprehensive na, kasi ang tendency sa kanya, napaka-comprehensive niya, pero overwhelming gamitin. Hindi naman eh. All of us naman, iba, pag may bagong tool, it might overwhelm us. But then, I think with proper capacity building and workshops on the use of it, okay po siya. I think Sir Lee, Dr. Lee has a question.
All right, thank you, Dr. Lawrence, for that challenge actually on the utilization of the toolkit. But it's good that we are accepting and realizing that, yes, definitely we need capacity building work to ensure that this toolkit will be used at its maximum. And thank you again, Dr. Lawrence and Doc Cherry and Sir Jerry for your reactions on the toolkit. It's a quick look at actually listening to the two of you, it's just giving us a quick look on the existing legal framework for ensuring human rights are not compromised in introducing projects in our communities. But katulad ng binanggit ni Mary Joy, and we hope na hindi lang tayo matatapos in writing the policies or in looking at the legal framework. We have to extend beyond that and look at the implementation, because that's where reality will happen to ensure that children's rights are not violated. All right, so at this point, we are very happy that we are opening the floor for your questions. In fact, sinimulan na ni Dr. Lawrence. Thank you, Dr. Lawrence, for that good segue on the next part of the program, which is the question and answer from our participants. So actually looking at the mix of our participants, marami tayong participants all over the country, from Luzon to Mindanao, and I cannot name all of them, but we have Tibuli National High School, the South Cotabato Division, and some members from the media and also from civil society organizations again from Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. So we are now opening the floor to our audience for any questions you may have regarding the document, regarding the presentations, or anything that you shared this morning. You may send your question through our Q&A portion or the chat box here in Zoom. So I'm gonna check if we have questions. So feel free to open your videos if you want to be recognized, or throw your questions directly in the live video, or you can type in your questions on our chat box and the Q&A part in your Zoom panel. All right, I think we have one question. This is from Sir Catalino Rivera. May we know what are the characteristics of the present environmental laws that cause severe systemic and serious disadvantage for the children? I think he actually has a lot of questions, but you can just zoom in kung ano yun. Is the non-discriminatory nature of environmental laws correct, since it is derived from a more basic right of equality? So pwede natin i-relate yung question niya na yun sa kanyang unang question: what are the characteristics of the present environmental laws that may or cause severe systemic and serious disadvantage for children? Anyone from our panel and speakers?
Thank you for the question, si Doc Lee. So si Doc Lee po ay member ng ating board. So for the first question, may we know what are the characteristics of the present environmental laws that cause severe systemic and serious disadvantage for the children? So actually, hindi ito masyado kasing malawak ang environmental laws and marami sila. So wala for the development of the toolkit, mas for ano siya ay sandali, wala yung question. Ang approach for the development of the toolkit was a more general approach, since we were considering the fact na maraming environmental laws, and each policy can have different aspects that can impact children. So that was a main consideration for the development of the toolkit, that we present something that can be applied generally to all kinds of environmental policies. And I think Ms. Mary Joy has answers then for the next questions.
Yes, so for the third question, is there a moral difference between adults and children's rights we should consider when proposing inclusion of children's rights into the present environmental laws? Children, are very vulnerable. They're part of the vulnerable groups that we must focus on. We cannot really equate children's with the adults. Children are not little adults, so they have special needs and special vulnerabilities that might be we need to take in more consideration, especially when it comes to environment, because of their physical, their bodies are still developing, their mental integrity are still developing, and when they are exposed to different environmental hazards, toxic pollutions, and when their rights are environmental policies are not protecting their rights, there's definitely a large impact on children in their development as an adult. So I thank you for that question.
Thank you, Joy and Jam, for that, for answering the questions. We have another question. I think this is from youth organization, because their question is, how can we as a youth group use tools? No, I think our tools, that was presented this morning. Can Ban Toxics train us in using the tool? Both a question and a request.
Regarding that, gusto ko ulit balikan yung comment ng ating nung main author na si Mylene Makabuhay na sinabi niya na young people can be made aware of how chemicals pollution impact their human rights and can be capacitated to review and evaluate existing laws and advocate for themselves. So the tool is not only for the use of decision makers, but it can also be used by NGOs who want to conduct policy assessments and children na rin and young people who want to be more aware regarding their policies. So in fact, bukod sa future plans ng Ban Toxics na rin to conduct trainings, ay currently in development na rin yung alternative tool na mas less comprehensive and more child-friendly yung approach. So children na very young siguro can still use the tool to their advantage. So with regards to how you can request Ban Toxics, you can just contact us through our website, through our various people na you can contact. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I think that's correct. This toolkit was created for children and youth like you, and it will be very interesting that the youth themselves will utilize the toolkit. And yes, I think the next part of this launch is the rollout of the toolkit, and then as Jam said, you can send us requests for training or an orientation like this on how you can utilize the toolkit. I don't want to commit on behalf of Mary Joy and Jam, but I think they will be very happy to receive the invitation, and also from our participants, if you have questions, we still have time for more questions, 1 to 2 more. But we have a question here: how can we access Ban Toxics assistance in using the toolkit for our advocacy campaign? Might be pwedeng nasagutan natin siya, but you might have other response to this, Jam. Again, the question is: how can we access Ban Toxics assistance in using the toolkit for our advocacy campaign?
Yeah, so first and foremost, the toolkit is now available on our website at Ban Toxics, and if you are in this launching event, yeah, baka meron na rin kayong access initially, so you can review it, and yeah, you can. We are very accessible on our social media pages, and Ban Toxics, especially during the pandemic, marami kaming webinar series, and we have also been invited to speak on a lot of issues by various organizations. So we are very open to contacting, to working with others regarding this project. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And then Dr. Lawrence also mentioned in the chat that capacity building, not just for the lawmakers, LGs, but also children, would help educate and empower them. Yeah, speaking of children's right and empowerment, it will really be helpful for them. And then, nabanggit ni Dr. Lawrence, the Toxics Preschools program of Ban Toxic is one platform that is actually a good jumpstart for this. Yeah, so for participants who are in the academe, we have the Toxics Free program. So kung interested po kayo dyan, just send us a message. And ulitin ko lang yung sinabi ni Jam, available na po ang toolkit. That's the first thing that you can do is to visit Ban Toxics website and download the toolkit. All right, so we still have 5 more minutes for your questions. Please feel free to send in your questions either on the Q&A part or in the chat box on your Zoom platform. There is also a question, but I think nabanggit na rin ni Jam, but let's recognize this. Will there be a child-friendly version of the toolkit, or I think a more popularized version that is more fitting for children and youth? Yes, Joy.
Yes, so as mentioned by Jam, it's in the pipeline for the child-friendly toolkit. We recognize that children's participation in decision makings for their own welfare should be present also. So that's why we are developing a child-friendly toolkit with the contents also of this primary toolkit, but we will modify it so that they can be easily understood and the children can access information and they can participate in decision making in terms of environmental laws and policies. Thank you.
All right, that's a good next step. No, the rollout and a version that is more friendly, more child friendly. All right, so Saray would like to respond to the question.
Yes, good morning. Thank you very much, Ridel, and thank you very much for those questions. Yes, we will try our very best na mag-come out talaga ng mas child-friendly version nitong toolkit. We tried for a couple of times doing a child-friendly version, but since we're speaking more on laws and guidelines, medyo yung terms and terminologies are very strict or limiting sa conversion. But rest assured that we will come out with a child-friendly version of this. Siguro, although mo na makipagtulungan kami sa mga bata para maintindihan sa lingwahe na meron kayo. Yun pa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Saray, for that commitment for a child-friendly version of the toolkit. I think maraming civil society organizations and youth organizations will be very happy to receive the child-friendly version of the toolkit and start a conversation on mainstreaming children's rights in our environmental laws. All right, so our time for the Q&A question is up, but our conversation doesn't stop here. Please always feel free to send Ban Talk 6 your message, feedback, and reactions on the toolkit. Maraming platform, you can send it in our website or send us an email or visit Ban Talk 6 in Instagram and Facebook, and you can send us a direct message regarding this document and the toolkit or any other projects on sound chemical management. So thank you again to our panelists and our presenters this morning. Thank you everyone who attended today launching of Ban Talk 6 Child's Right Toolkit, mainstreaming children's rights in environmental laws. We are grateful to the contributions of Attorney Richard Gutierrez, Maylene Makabuhay, Basco Tungkag, Attorney Joanna Guzman, Mary Joy Maaret, Jam Lorenzo during the preparation and development of this document. The document is now up and available in Ban Talk 6 website. You may visit bantalk6.org should you wish to access the toolkit. You may find the toolkit under the Resources tab. And for the people who are joining us in the Zoom, we've also provided the link in the chat box. To everyone who attended today's event, please make sure that you have filled up the attendance sheet. The link to the Google form is available in the chat box. Certificate of attendance will be sent to those who finish the evaluation form. So aside from the registration, you need also to fill up our evaluation form. To close the program, we have a recorded message from our esteemed partner, Michael Yanga, Director of Dr. Yanga's Colleges Incorporated. Mr. Yanga is also a board member of Board of Trustees of Ban Talk 6.
A blessed day to all. Let me first thank everyone who has attended this very fruitful and meaningful webinar regarding the mainstreaming of children's rights in environmental laws. You know, I perfectly remember one of the most impactful statements in the ecological ethics that I'm also humbly teaching to my college students and my senior high school students is the right of every human being regarding the environment. And what is this? every human being has a right to a livable environment. It is a very basic statement, yet it tells us that we need to really refocus ourselves and go back to the basics of living a sustainable, toxic-free, and truly a caring heart for the environment. To all of you who have been part of this endeavor, let me first talk to the community behind the Ban Toxic community led by Mr. Ray San Juan. We thank you for this initiative. For our resource speaker, thank you very much for the enlightening insights. And to all of you, let us always remember that we need to inculcate and imbibe and instill in our hearts that we have rights. And more importantly, the future generations have rights. And what do we need to do? We have a role. We have a responsibility, more than the rights, to take care of our environment so that we can preserve the integrity of creation, so that we can preserve the integrity of every living thing here, so that the next generations to come will have a chance to a better life. We want progress. We want to get out of this pandemic. We want to be better. We start with the most essential. Let us love the environment. Let us really take care and be conscious of the rights of everyone to a livable environment. And yes, to the rights of every child with regards to the environment. They need the environment so that we can have a better future. Let us start by being responsible with the Lord's creations today. Once more, I'd like to thank everyone for being part of this very fruitful event. God bless everyone.
Wow, thank you, Sir Michael, for that very insightful closing remarks and for the reminder that we have the right to live in a sustainable and toxic-free world, but at the same time, it is our responsibility as stakeholders to take care of the environment and everyone. And now, as we face the new normal, katulad ng team natin this morning, or for the celebration of Children's Month, new normal na walang iwanan. Karapatan ng bawat bata atin nang tutukan sa mga ginagawang batas pangkalikasan. Thank you everyone for attending the online launching of mainstreaming children's rights in environmental law. We are always grateful for your support. Everyone is also invited to attend this afternoon's webinar. As we mentioned, our conversation doesn't stop here. We have created a lot of platform to reach out for you and start our conversation on building toxic-free world. So mamayang hapon po, meron po tayong webinar on children's rights and environmental law. Maganda po yan, karugtong ng ating launch at karugtong ng launch ng ating tutil. The webinar for today will start at 1 p.m. at sana po yung mga umattend po sa ating Zoom ngayon ay makasama pa rin namin ngayong hapon. Thank you everyone, and let's all take our lunch break. On behalf of Bantalk 6, keep safe. Maraming salamat po.
Maraming salamat po sa lahat. Salamat po, Sir Ridel.
Salamat po.